Hello, my name is Matt. Welcome to Unbearable 73. In this episode, we will discuss unfairly obscure horror films and an article from Dread Central. So to start, let's define the concept of what an unfairly obscure movie is. The article reference here mostly gets it right. An unfairly obscure horror movie is a horror movie that, for whatever reason, it's not talked about much or perhaps not known by the fandom, despite the fact the movie is very good in most capacities. So first I'm going to go over the suggestions from this article from Dread Central, which you can see on the screen. Then I will provide self-suggestions of my own. Now, looking at the article first, all this article really does is give you a definition and a list. It doesn't really go into all the films. So I will go over them myself. This article was published about 2 weeks ago, by the way, for the day of the posting of this video. So the first film on the list is Of Unknown Origin from 1983. This is a psychological obsession horror type film starring Peter Weller as Bart Hughes, a man who becomes obsessed with a rodent in his basement and destroys his house trying to kill it. Which, that sounds more comedy than horror, but, you know. The movie tries to indicate indirectly that there is some sort of science fiction or supernatural element to the rodent in question. I saw this one 2 years ago. I was not impressed. Not to say it's a bad movie, but I never really felt compelled to ever watch it again. I was kind of bored. I remember being bored when I watched it. I was like, this is a horror film. I gotta like this. I'm like, this is, yeah, you know. Now, however, the second film I mentioned, entirely the opposite. The Devil's Reign from 1975. I watched this film every couple of years. I recently got it in high def and watched it again about 3 or 4 months ago, I believe. It's somewhere in my top 50 horror movies of all time. It features a wonderful, over-the-top, but in a good way, performance by Ernest Borgnine as the villainous leader of a satanic cult. William Shatner plays the protagonist, and it features a pretty good cast, including Eddie Albert and Tom Skerritt. Note, this is John Travolta's first actual film. He's in a minor role in this. In this film, definitely there's a lot more people to watch it and talk about it. I'm almost like it seems lost how few times I see it mentioned anywhere. Next is a film called Scarecrows from 1988. The movie sounds somewhat preposterous on its face. It's basically about criminals being hunted by possessed scarecrows. I mean, what could you want in a horror film? Criminals possess scarecrows? It stars no one you ever likely heard of unless you've seen a lot of B and C grade horror films. I wasn't impressed. I've only seen it once when I was 15 or so, and I probably never would have heard of it before this article if one of my cousin's friends, who, as it turned out, was actually my aunt, but I didn't know that until I was around 45 years old. Anyway, she opened a video store, and she happened to like horror films, so I probably rented 20 or 30 bad horror films a week from that store. And conversely, we go from bad to good again. Lovely Molly from 2011. I tend to like the demonic possession and supernatural affliction type horror films, which I think is my grandmother's influence. I remember making me watch The Exorcist when I was like 7, and then getting into those sort of films after that. So that's probably why I originally gave this film a shot, thinking it's just going to be another schlock possession film. Boy, was I glad I watched this movie. I was completely surprised how much I enjoyed this film. Like, way over the top. Enjoyed the film. Not that the film was over the top. It's a big, great horror film, but the director and producer took B-level resources and made an almost A-level effort here. It's a lot better than you think it could possibly be. The film has a basic plot pretty similar to most movies of its type. A couple, Tim and the titular Molly, move into Molly's childhood home. Molly has struggled with substance abuse and it has a very troubled childhood, which ties into the supernatural element. The couple is undergoing marital issues and there's financial issues. The classic setup for move wherever you are, be troubled, get involved with the demons. It's the subgenres trope plot. I hate spoiling the film, but this movie has one of those glorious, but in a skin-crawling, creepy way, first screen appearances of the entity in question, like ever. Of any film would ever do the demon reveal or whatever, this is probably in a creepy sense in the top 5. And next we get a movie called Straight Jacket from 1964. I think I saw this in the 80s again with my family friend / aunt who had the video store. I probably only mostly watched because Joan Crawford was hot when she was back in the 60s. I wasn't impressed with the film. So unless you want to see a youngest Joan Crawford, you can skip this one. So next up on the list is a film called Paganini Horror from 1988. I dimly recall the film and only the visuals. I have a feeling this is one of those Italian horror films that my grandma introduced me to, which was not even translated in English when I first saw it. It's a classic B-grade horror premise, especially when you're talking about Italian horror movies. A rock band made of pretty girls finds an unpublished score by Paganini called Paganini Horror, decides to record and make a music video in the house, once owned by Paganini. And once they play the song, it opens a portal to hell. Who'd have thought that the famous composer Paganini was also a hell-worshipping demon worshiper or whatever? Did I mention the pretty chicks in the rock band? You can imagine why I remember this film. I guess someday I'll find an English translation and watch it to see if there's actually more than just pretty chicks running from demons or whatever. So the next film, again, we flip back to something really good. It's called The Tunnel from 2011. This is one of the top 10 found footage films of all time, and very few people, comparatively speaking, have seen it or talk much about it. The plot is kind of, again, straightforward, and I find in a lot of ways, with the exception of certain movies, having a simple, straightforward genre subtype plot doesn't hurt in most cases. Okay, so the plot here is underneath New South Wales are the old subway tunnels, like millions and millions of miles of them, whatever, and they've been sealed up for like 100 years or something like that. So the tunnels, so there's a drought going on, and so the government said we're going to open those tunnels. We know there's like millions upon millions of liters of fresh water stored down there from all the rain that's been accumulating, so we can get that water, purify it, and solve our drought problems. Sooner thereafter, once these tunnels have been opened up, there's reports of people missing, body parts being found, monster sightings, and whatever. So I send a news crew to investigate this series of underground tunnels, and it all goes bad. Found footage, and you can imagine what happens, but it's very well done. I recommend that one, obviously. There's another one called Creep from 2004. I watched it once right after it came out. I think I actually went to the theater for this one. Well, the last time I went was back in this time, like the 2004 area. I think I just recovered from my broken leg and was going out more for the movies and stuff like that. This felt like a waste of money to me. It's about a woman locked in London underground overnight who's being stalked by deformed serial killers through subway tunnels. I don't know why. I mean, I guess it could have been argued to have done well. I wasn't impressed by it. And then we have a film on this list I've never seen or even heard of or even read the book it was based on, called In the Dark Winter. It's from 1988. From your own description, it seems similar to a lot of those haunted forests in Japan movies where there's like a haunted forest or a forest where people commit suicide all the time or something like that, and like ghosts haunt and stalk people from there and so forth. But this one takes place in Australia. Here's one. Their last recommendation of obscure horror films is Murder Party from 2007. I think I saw this on a streaming service maybe 10 years after it came out. So that would have been like 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago. Now, I'm going to preface my comment by saying I'm very selective on horror comedy. I am not a big horror comedy fan. If it's not like The Evil Dead or Nightmare on Elm Street or a film I'm going to mention below in my section, I tend not to like horror comedies. Okay, and thus I didn't like this film, didn't find it memorable, and I'm not going to recommend it. So now I'll give you my five of my films, which some might not seem as obscure, but we'll talk about that. So first up, this is a horror film that I recommend every time someone asks me to recommend a horror film, because it's a shame that this film didn't go anywhere. It's certainly the best horror film of this century. I'll put it that way. It's called The Shrine from 2010. I mentioned it in some other horror episodes on the channel. Not going to spoil it much. There's too much information to spoil. I'm just going to tell you a couple of things up front that you need to know if you want to even watch it. It's a supernatural, demonic haunt type of movie. And then that's all you really need to know if you want to watch it. But here's critical. If you get a modern streamer Blu-ray of it, and I recommend the original media, by the way, I have a link below, they will have subtitle translation of the characters who speak in Polish for the entire film. Meaning there's characters in the film, quite a lot of them, who only ever speak Polish, and in the original film, there were no subtitles. Okay? Don't use the subtitles on the Blu-ray or the streaming service to translate to Polish. The original intent of the director was for the lack of English-speaking characters to be a terror element. He timed everything. So if you know what they're saying, you're not going to get the sort of horror. He wants you to have the horror of these couple of Americans in this foreign country where no one understands them experiencing all this crap. And it works. Just trust me. All right? So my second recommendation, which is really 2 recommendations, I'm cheating here. The Abominable Dr. Phibes from 1971. You can make an argument this is my favorite horror film. Uh, it's certainly in that 5 or 6 I think of when I think of my favorite horror film, along with Halloween, Prince of Darkness, The Shrine. You know, the sequel to Abominable Doctor Phibes is called Doctor Phibes Rises Again. The Omen. Uh, I mean, there's a couple others, but another one I mentioned down below, by the way. Uh, but this stars the great Vincent Price. It's a dark horror comedy and it's about over the top revenge, but not over the top in a bad comedic way. Like, well, you're like, what the hell is going on? And it's like there's a bit of dark. There's a lot of dark comedy in this. I mean, the first film, he uses the template of Egypt to punish those who basically he blames for killing his wife. And the second film, it's more of a mythological quest by Dr. Phibes. But they're great movies. They're just great. And now my third recommendation for an obscure horror film, it's not that obscure in the sense of being, it was well publicized. It was an A-level, I'm sure it did really well at the box office, right? But for some reason, horror fans, I don't see it mentioned much. And I'm surprised. It's Fallen in 1988. It's Denzel Washington's probably his only horror film that I can think of. I can't say too much about it without spoiling it, but it's basically a demonic possession film. It was very well acted. I don't know why it gets so little attention or why Denzel didn't do more horror films. He was great in this. I mean, he did it so, like, it was a kind of okay movie to good movie. There's a lot of good actors. The actors in the film sold this for me. John Goodman was in it. A couple other actors you will see the names of if you, well, I'll get the IMDb up here for you so you can see. Denzel was in it. Donald Sutherland, James Gandolfini, John Goodman, Elizabeth Dedovitz, Elias Koteas, Michael Pagan, Frank Medrano. I mean, these are all actors you've seen in mainstream films, and they really sell the events of this movie. Now, my fourth recommendation, again, horror fans certainly have heard of this before, but when people mention, their top 10 of all time or whatever, I don't know why this film doesn't get pretty close. It's called Phantasm from 1979. I'll call that one up here for you. There were 4 sequels. They're not as good as the original, but the first one is great. The second one is very good. The third and fourth one are okay, and the fifth one is... I have to watch it again. I liked it, but wasn't sure if I would how I would have rated it. But I was sure I liked it because it was the 5th part of the first 4, or because it was a good movie on its own. I only seen it once so far. Right. Am I thinking of the right film? The 5th one did come out. Anyway, it has one of the great villains of the Tall Man. Angus, played by Angus Scrimm. The dude is terrifying. If the whole Slender Man and Doge Man and all those sort of like tall, thin guys in suits who terrorize you in the forest. This is the movie version of that from the 1970s. This is the guy who makes them look lame. In any case, just a little bit about the film so you don't get shocked by it. Phantasm initially comes across as a supernatural horror film, but in reality it's a science fiction horror film about aliens invading from another dimension, and the plot is that taking human corpses and reanimating to be enslaved soldiers and workers. It can sound a little goofy, but the way they implement this is excellent, and I recommend watching this one wholeheartedly. And last is, again, this is one of the candidates from one of my favorite horror films of all time. It stars the great Christopher Lee as Nicholas Ducalavrechou. It's called The Devil Rides Out. It's from 1968. It was a Hammer film. It's basically a supernatural horror adventure film, kind of like the TV show Supernatural, but without the tongue-in-cheek humor or cultural references. So it's more into, it takes it at a higher level of serious than Supernatural did, but it's still very serious take on it. Recommend that one hands down. So, one man's obscure horror film is another woman's obsessed cult favorite. I'm sure some of you watching this might consider my suggestions not obscure at all and saying, why the hell did I waste your time with this video? But ultimately, this is not about whose version of obscure is better, but rather spreading the word about lesser-known horror films so that more of us can enjoy them. Comment down below if you please, or ask if you have any questions for me. Okay? If you have any suggestions for follow-up videos on this, because I might review all of these movies eventually. Share this video if you will, like if you like, dislike if you dislike, subscribe if you want to hear more from me. My name is Matt. This has been Unbearable 73. Have a nice day. I am out of here.